In the following days, Do-hook visited his father and told him that he still believed his brother was the one who poisoned Hee-ju because he always harms what he loves. This time, he handed his father a USB drive containing videos from a while ago, in which his brother walks perfectly. He also gave him an important audio message asking him to watch and listen to it and judge for himself. However, he asked his father not to mention any of this to Do-hook. Later, Do-hook and Ihu were walking home, talking about family, when Yoo mentioned that it seemed like the marks on his wrists were changing color. Do-hook replied that to him they still looked the same, but he had noticed it too. Yoo, however, had a solution. He had been recommended a very good shaman and already made a reservation to go there with Do-hook, which they agreed on. Meanwhile, Yura was terrified. Jo had asked her if the child was his, to which she answered yes, but it seemed like she had doubts about it. When her mother arrived, she saw the pregnancy test on the bed and immediately embraced her daughter, congratulating her. She kept saying that now that Yura was pregnant, she would definitely marry Do-hook. She praised Yura for the good job she did, but this was exactly why Yura never wanted to get pregnant. While her mother was happy, Yura was terrified because she didn't even know for sure who the father of her child was. Yet her mother had already planned her future. Her mother was astonished, asking how she could get pregnant by someone without knowing who the father was. It seemed like Yura was becoming like her, but at that moment, Honi told her that for everyone, the father of the child would be Do-hook. Before anything else, she had to inform the CO family. As the days went by, Yoo and Do-hook went to see the shaman, a very wise woman who started telling them that only one person should have died, but in their place, 3 had. The fate was twisted, but at least one person would live. There was a child to protect, just like a cat. She mentioned someone close to Do-hook, but the spirit of the cat would soon depart. The aura and color were weak. Clearly she was referring to the cat that had saved Do-hook. But Iu wanted to know how to live, and at that moment the shaman wrote a talisman for her. Yoo then asked Do-hook to step outside, and once alone she asked the shaman if the others would be saved if that person died. The shaman replied that if the twisted fate returned to its original place, then both would survive. After speaking with the shaman, they headed home, and finally YJ confessed that she knew who the third person was. It was her grandfather's secretary, Huin. He had the same mark on his wrist, and he had died after crashing Do-hook's car that day. From that moment on, the uncertainty of the future began to consume them. The following day, Hee-ju met with Jun, who apparently already had evidence of the fraud that Hae was committing. He handed over the proof, and Hee-ju would take care of revealing it in the most eye-caring way possible. Meanwhile, she gave Jun one of the talismans from the shaman so he could have a good life. She told him what the shaman had said, and Hee-ju agreed to always carry the talisman with him, because he certainly didn't want to die this time. For IU, this was crucial. They needed to find a way for all 3 to be saved. In the following days, Yu met with her mother, Haimei. Haimei told her that she would soon retire, but before doing so, she wanted to provide evidence of what Yu had done. She hadn't spoken up until then because she had been preparing for a special moment. But then Haimei never thought of telling her that Yu was her daughter. Haimei hadn't had the courage to say it. Every time she wanted to, she saw Yu happy and just couldn't. For Hee-ju, this was selfish. She had spent her whole life believing that she didn't mean anything to anyone, but all of that changed when she met Do-hook. So, at least for giving her life and letting her meet Do-hook, she was thankful to her mother. Meanwhile, Do-hook went to talk to his beloved brother and brought 2 cups of coffee with him. Once alone, Do-hook came with the apparent intention of reconciling. But of course, Do-hook knew it wasn't like that. When Do-hook noticed he hadn't taken a sip, he asked, "Do you think I put something in it?" Do-hook hesitated, took a drink, and Do-hook said, "You're right, what would I gain by doing that?" As Do-hook checked the time and saw nothing happening, he was surprised. "It seems I didn't put enough in." Do-hook then said, "Soon you'll start feeling dizzy and pass out." What a shame. Do-hook began to feel unwell, and Do-hook added, "I was just joking. But if you ever touch my wife again, what you just experienced will happen for real." Before, Do-hook had backed off in the face of his brother, but from this moment on, he would never retreat again. In the afternoon, Yura went to meet the supposed father of her child, who had just finished work. He met her, and although she was excited, he wasn't pleased to see her. He took her to a cafe and wanted to get straight to the point. What did she want? As expected, Yura wanted to marry him, unless he wanted the news to hit the press. She wasn't threatening him, she just didn't want to raise a child alone. However, for Jahu, marriage without love didn't interest him. He wanted to know how much money she wanted to disappear from his life. But Yura wasn't after money, she only wanted power. Hoku, a man without scruples, cared little about this woman's desires, although she was more influential than him. Still, he wasn't going to let Hoku get away with it. The next day, a new shareholders meeting was being held at Redtail. After some playful exchanges between Ihu and Do-hook, they headed to the session, where Ihu's father and the venomous Honjit arrived, both powerful figures. But soon, everything would go wrong for this woman. At that moment, everything began. Yu sent the message, and the president's secretary entered. Clearly, Yu's father knew everything, and was playing his role very well. But the best part was that every shareholder received the same message from Yu, the news that the president of the Rowan Art Museum, he was the prime suspect in a tax evasion case. Yu knew this was her doing, and she ran after her. But by then the police had arrived and were taking He into custody as a suspect in a tax investigation. Hugh had arrived at her appointment for the rhyme moved by Hugh, but had never received a penny. She had sold several paintings to the collection managed by Hugh, but had never received a penny. So, goodbye, little bird. The best part was that all the insults and her confession to Yu were well recorded on Yu's phone. This was just the beginning. Yu returned to the session, and her father was already accepting her new position as head of the office. Meanwhile, Hyun informed Yu that Han Je would be released within 48 hours or less unless an order was issued, but Hyun knew this was just a test for what would come next, so for now he wouldn't do anything further. On the other hand, Do-hook was talking to his sister Donya, who mentioned that a few days ago Yu had visited the family alone and opened up to them, revealing all the suffering she had endured at the hands of her family, especially her stepmother. But the most shocking part was that she turned out to be the biological daughter of her adoptive father. Hearing all this made Do-hook nervous, so he headed to see his beloved Yu. Meanwhile, in Song Gang's office, Do-hook's father was talking to Juk. He invited him to the family dinner that evening, which Juk had no intention of attending. In the middle of the conversation, his father said, "I know everything, and there's a line even my son can't cross." Juk pretended not to know what he was talking about. But Do-hook understood. He finally told his father everything, not knowing what this old man would do with him. Meanwhile, Do-hook was walking with Yu, enjoying the spring, and it was their first time seeing this beautiful place. They saw a family so happy, and Yu began to dream of a future, hoping to survive the deadlines of their lives. She wished to find true happiness with him. Do-hook promised that nothing would happen to them, and that together they could be happy. Meanwhile, Do-hook's mother was preparing the entire dinner for the night, but at that moment, someone arrived uninvited, the annoying Yura. Donna and Jonna were about to kick her out, but in the midst of this, Yura started her drama. She pretended to be disgusted and informed them that it was because she was pregnant, leaving everyone stunned. Of course, Yura was pregnant with Ho-hook. Because of this, Do-hook's parents asked Gyo to come home immediately. Both of them knew about the pregnancy and wanted to know how he was going to take responsibility. Do-hook's father knew that he apparently had no intention of marrying her, and indeed Juk didn't plan to marry Yura, which disappointed his father. So he decided not to see his son again, neither at home nor at work, and those two annoying lovebirds were left with nothing. That's what happens when you're sneaky. As they left, they started shouting at each other, mostly him, blaming her for them having nothing. He thought about getting rid of her, but it seemed like she wanted to marry him no matter what. Given the situation, Juk took Yura to an office-tel, a type of studio apartment in South Korea, where she would stay until the baby was born. She wasn't allowed to do anything foolish. Just wait. Assuming the baby was his, they would figure out what to do. But for now, because of her foolishness, she had ruined everything, and from now on, he forbade her from doing anything like this without consulting him first, or he would not take responsibility for her actions. Days passed, and Xianye met with Gin, her secretary, who accused her of being involved in the fraud with IU. Xianye offered her money in exchange for the evidence and to let things go. The woman was furious because Xianye had threatened her family. So, if she wanted the evidence she had collected, she asked for 10 billion won. Onjae was not going to give it to her, and then the woman said, "Then 1 billion." But she didn't accept it either, so the amount was raised to 20 million, which infuriated her, as Hyun didn't intend to submit to people like her. Ultimately, she knew nothing this person could do would hurt her. She left, and this woman, Hyun, had only followed Jeon's orders. She assured the woman of her family's safety and an agreed-upon sum of money. But now, with this recording, she added more evidence to imprison Hyun. Meanwhile, Hye was furious with Hye-jin and was already planning to silence her forever. But then she remembered Do-hook. She called him and asked for his help with something, killing someone, and of course she'd pay him for the favor. Do-hook was thrilled to help her and asked for 5 million for the favor. Honye accepted, as now no one would get in her way. The next night, Do-hook met with Jeon. He gave her the recording of the call with Jae, and also provided his bank statement showing the 5 million she had transferred to him. Thanks to this, Honye would definitely go to prison for many years. Although Do-hook was receiving money in exchange for this, he also got photos of his beautiful daughter. Photos that were the best reward. Meanwhile, at Yu's father's house, he had gathered the whole family. Hye arrived, looking like a goddess, and they started to eat. At that moment, Yura felt nauseous, and Jeon told Yu about the pregnancy, but Ye laughed at her, already knowing that the baby's father didn't want to marry Yura. Jie didn't know this. After eating, Yu's father asked Ms. Kim to bring a document from his office, and handed it to his wife. It was the divorce papers. She didn't understand what was going on, but her husband clarified everything. He had been seeing through her all this time. Yu enjoyed every moment of it. At that point, the doorbell rang. Miss Kim opened it, and it was the police, accusing Hye of fraud and informing her that Do-hook had confessed and presented all the evidence for her case. Honye couldn't believe this was happening. She defended herself, and Yor suffered because she couldn't believe her mother was this kind of person. In desperation, Honye warned that Yu wouldn't get away with it. But now Yu was not alone. Finally, her father opened his eyes and told Hye that his daughter would receive everything from him, the house and the company. It couldn't have been clearer. She would have nowhere to return to, and worse, she would rot in prison. The only way out for Hye was for her daughter to marry Yuk. This devastated Yura because now the only thing that could save her and her mother was if the child she was expecting was Yuk. In desperation, she asked to see Hyehu the next day, and they met. Yura wanted to seek help from her sister because she didn't know how to raise a child alone. She begged Hyehu to help her. But Hyehu shared something else. Onja had tried to kill her and her biological mother, so why should she care about the child Yura was expecting? Hyehu told her the truth, that her biological father was Do-hook, and that her mother had tried to buy him to kill Hye. Moreover, He had killed Hwan's father, and also He's adoptive mother. Because of all of this, He wouldn't show any mercy, and hoped Yura would suffer as much as she did because of both of them. After that, she walked away. The next few days, Sejio continued to worry about the deadline marked on her wrist. Given everything that had happened, she was finally free from her past. But then Do-hook arrived, wanting to spend much more time with her. He kissed her and informed her that since their marriage had only been contractual before and hadn't been officially registered, they could do so now because they were now a real couple. Yu wasn't sure about it. The shaman had told her that only one of them would die, and it could be her. If she died, Do-hook would be left alone, and she didn't want that, so she asked to postpone it for a little longer. Do-hook understood what she was concerned about. Later, they started planning their life together. She didn't want a new wedding, but rather just photos of the two of them. She wanted to travel, and he wanted to return to the sea to face his fears, just as he did as a child. Every wish for their beautiful future filled them with hope. Maybe they could truly have a happy ending. In the following days, Yu met with Ju-on. Thanks to her help, he was finally in prison. She asked Ju-on to focus on what he loved most and gifted him the Rayon Art Museum, where he could display her father's artwork. This was her father's greatest dream. From now on, Hyun was free and could devote himself to what he loved most: art. Days passed, and Ju-on visited Hye in prison. He confronted her, telling her about all the plans he made to get her incarcerated. But now, what he wanted to know was why she killed his father. For her, it was simple. Hyun's father chose to die, and she had nothing to do with it. Hyun was furious and expected a confession from her, but he didn't threaten her. She remained as calm as ever, though saying that thanks to her daughter, she would be out of prison soon. However, Hyun assured her that it wouldn't happen that way. Hyun, her secretary, had already submitted all the evidence, including recordings from her victims. So, Hyun would never leave prison, and he warned her not to do anything else, otherwise her precious daughter would suffer the consequences. This left Hye in despair, thinking that she truly needed her daughter to marry Hook if she ever wanted to get out of prison. On the other hand, the precious daughter had asked Juk to bring her fried chicken, but this heartless man didn't bring it. They started to argue, but he didn't have time, and besides, he could have asked for it. Yura knew that Hook was hardly interested in her baby, and she desperately tried to get his attention, though nothing was working. Yura screamed at him because she was the mother of his child, but for Yuk, this was just a desperate attempt to keep him, and it wasn't working. However, Yura wanted his help to get revenge on Do-hook and Ayu, and this caught his interest. Yura promised she wouldn't cause him any more trouble from now on, but in return, she wanted him to kill Ayu. Hook spent days thinking about it. Killing Ayu wasn't a bad idea, especially because an opportunity was coming. Just then, his new secretary, Miss Kim, entered, an ally of H. However, the fool that JH was didn't know anything, and as she pretended to follow his lead, he became interested in her. He thought about taking her to a fancy dinner that night, but his plan was ruined when Yura showed up to see him. She immediately began marking her territory, and Miss Kim had no choice but to leave. This infuriated him, and he asked Yura, "Which will be easier, dealing with IU or dealing with you?" He then warned her not to bother him and to be patient, waiting for the news she was so eager to hear. Days passed, and an important executive meeting took place aboard a cruise ship. Yu attended alone, but the most important thing was that she came to secure investments for her company. She had her sights set on director Lee Zanga, the head of a vegan cosmetics company, which would one day become one of the largest companies in Korea. Yu didn't hesitate to take advantage of the moment and made a deal with this company. Later, she went with Yumi to watch the fireworks, but Yumi went to the bathroom. Left alone, a man approached her. He supposedly came on behalf of one of the most important figures in the cosmetics world. Yu didn't hesitate to follow him, a grave mistake. As soon as they were alone, he began to strangle her. After making her dizzy, he pushed her into the sea. Weak and drowning in the deep blue sea, all the good moments from her life flashed through her mind. But, above all, she remembered the love she had received in this life. She never thought that, due to a momentary lapse, her life would end this way. But unexpectedly, Do-hook entered the water, rescued her, gave her air, and she revived. However, due to his trauma, he couldn't bear it any longer and started to drown, sinking deeper and deeper. The next day, both Do-hook and Yu were in the hospital, but due to the events, Do-hook didn't wake up. He was in a deep sleep, reminding her of a little kitten, the same kitten he had once saved. Nube. The kitten greeted him, and just then it saw a bright light. It immediately ran toward it, and when it touched the light, a flash appeared, and Do-hook came back to life. He woke up and saw Yu, who was very frightened, and she wanted to know how he had dared to go into that place. Do-hook explained that he wanted to see the fireworks with her. When he saw her in the water, his fear vanished. He simply thought of saving her, so he jumped into the water to rescue her. Fortunately, they received help in time, and both were fine. After thinking about what could have happened, Yu wanted to leave her fear behind, just like Do-hook had done. When Do-hook mentioned wanting to register their marriage, she was happy, but she was still afraid of leaving him alone. However, after experiencing this, she understood that now was not the time to doubt. So she asked him that once they were out of the hospital, they would go together to register their marriage, and they agreed to it. On the other hand, Do-hook's father summoned his son Hook and clearly asked him, "Did you have anything to do with what happened to Do-hook?" He denied it. But his father added, "If it was really you who did this, I will never forgive you." Later, Do-hook received help from his brother-in-law, who informed him that the suspect who pushed Zhe had been arrested before he could flee. They investigated his phone and bank accounts, and as Do-hook had suspected, the real culprit was Zhe-hook. They discovered that it was him who had been depositing money into the criminal's account. At this, Do-hook remembered the warning he had given to his brother. This time, he wasn't planning on staying idle.